Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Mark from Solar Games, and got a really interesting email over the weekend. A subscriber emailed me over the weekend and said, "Hey, with all this discussion about 30th anniversary and about like proxies and about all these little, different changes now within Wizards, what are your thoughts, Mark? What are your thoughts on potentially Wizards going after individuals who are printing or using proxies like the record companies did back in the 90s, 2000s, right? So for those of you guys who are pretty young and don't know this, back in the old school days, we had a software called LimeWire. And this is before even torrenting. So I won't even get into torrenting, but there was a software called LimeWire, and I'm really showing you my age talking about this. And I don't even mean the LimeWire of like 2010s. I mean LimeWires back in like 1999, 2000, that era. Basically, the software allowed you to go and just download P2P files from other people, right? So people can kind of upload and you can download directly from them. Again, it's P2P, so it's different from torrenting. I won't get into the whole details of how that works and why it's different, but just imagine like you can make a direct connection to somebody and download a file. The thing is, normally back in the old school days, well, people didn't know how to host a file server, so they couldn't just do that. And LimeWire allowed you to basically host your files online for the entire internet. You didn't have to really learn it, you could just do it. Now, this of course led to a lot of like pirating of music, movies, you name it. But back then, it's mostly just music because I'll tell you, I had like a dial-up connection, and even downloading a song takes maybe like, I want to say like half an hour for a 3 megabyte file type of thing. I don't remember how long. I just remember it being ridiculous, and there's no way you're downloading a movie. So just everything was super slow because, again, dial-up. So first question is, is there any chance that WotC is going to start hitting individuals because they're using proxies? I think the quick answer is no. Will they ever hit individuals? Maybe. But right now, in the current state, they are in the doghouse with the whole PR department, right? Individuals currently hate them. And when you're in this position where the players are not happy with you, you definitely don't want to do anything else that could potentially risk another, potential upheaval from the players. So you definitely don't want to hit individuals. In fact, back in, the early 2000s, when record companies did go after, a mom who downloaded music, and it's just, again, it's so famous in my head. I think she was fined like $70,000. Again, that's pretty big money back then, right, for downloading music. And I think while they won the court case, of course, because it's a legal issue, right, she did violate copyright. The perception of what had happened was really poor. In fact, it was just not effective. Meaning they did this, but, well, what are you going to do? Find everybody who's downloading music? It's kind of impossible. Even just running the court cases is kind of like, they wanted to do this to basically scare people away from downloading, because it was not effective actually in clawing back the money. You just couldn't do it. And your mom and pop might not even be able to pay you $70,000. So what are you really going to do about it, right? So my opinion on this, they're not going to hit individuals. Plus, unlike back in the old school days with LimeWire, they could track where the file went. They can't really track that you printed a proxy and you're playing it with at home. Now, but this does bring up a really good discussion between the difference between fakes, counterfeit, and proxy, right? So there's a really interesting perspective. So first of all, what is the difference between proxy and fake? Realistically, there's nothing really different. A proxy is just a counterfeit card, in essence. Now, I think the core, though, is that it's the intent, right? A counterfeit card is meant to deceive, meant to trick people, whereas a proxy is essentially, a proxy is essentially a substitute, right? So it's a representation of the real card. As you can see, even from my description of those two terms, you can see the intent, right? A proxy would be some player who says, hey, I would like to play with this card, and I may not have the card, or I may have the card, but I don't want to use the original card because I don't want to damage it. This happens, like for me personally, I don't really want to play with my very expensive cards, so I just kind of don't use them personally. But I know a lot of other people who will, instead of using the expensive card, they will use a proxy, right? The whole idea is that it's a representation of the card they have, does not risk any potential like loss, theft, damage to the original card. It's a pretty good idea, actually. That's pretty much the core difference between the two. So if you're out there counterfeiting, if you're out there trying to like trick people by like selling a fake card to somebody, well, that's an issue, right? And usually with proxies, the whole idea is that they will do something, because again, I'm not trying to trick somebody. They'll do something on the card to show that it's not a real Magic card. For example, one of the most common things that a lot of people do is the back of the card is something different. So it could be very, very different. It could be something fun, etc. So it just very clearly states, hey, this is not a real Magic card. Yeah. I think more and more as we go into the future, with Wizards releasing 30th anniversary, basically in some ways legitimizing use of proxies, I think there's less grounds for Wizards to go after players for using proxies. Now, this is the really tricky part. Technically, proxies, fakes, counterfeits are not allowed in sanctioned tournament, right? So if you play Vintage Legacy, you have to submit your deck, and technically, like, if there are cards that are questionable, a judge can check your deck and determine, probably not a judge, somebody who, authenticator or whatever, can check your deck and determine whether your cards are fake or real. And if your cards are fake, you can get a disqualification. So it's pretty serious, right? But at the same time, I mean, who's actually checking? So I was listening to MTG Goldfish. I think it was Krim who talked about this, or I think it was Richard. He says that he's played many tournaments, and there were a lot of questionable looking dual lands that he played, right? Because he's playing Vintage. So there's that. And then if we talk about more casual formats, right, like Commander and whatnot, there's even less people who really care, right? But this brings up a really good point about Commander. Now, in actual tournament standing, a player can, if you're playing with those proxies, you're taking a risk. Sure, it's, your idea here is you're not trying to trick anybody, you're trying to play the game. But if the game and the rules require that you have the real card, you should just get the real card. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. Even if they're very expensive, maybe you just can't play, but that is what it is. However, in Commander, and I don't mean like competitive Commander, I just mean normal Commander, like with friends, super casual, there is this kind of like thing about Rule 0, right? So usually Rule 0, people talk about their decks, talk about power level, talk about what their deck is supposed to do. So you have this idea of like, hey, is this going to be a fun game? Another thing that's kind of unspoken rule about Rule 0 is you usually should also in that moment talk about what cards you're using. Examples are, anything from like maybe you're playing one silver border card that is flavorful for your deck, and it's not too crazy as a card that it won't ruin the game. Maybe you want to talk about, for example, utilizing certain proxy cards, that kind of things at the Rule 0. For example, I've done this with my Survival of the Fittest. I put my gold border one in because I just, I don't want to use the normal one in a deck. It's a quite expensive card. It's a proxy, essentially. It's not tournament legal, but I just let people know, still officially Wizard printed card. It's just gold border, collector's edition, or championship edition, I guess. Brian Selden, I think. So these are things that you should be maybe declaring during that pre-conversation of a Commander game. However, just even more, putting more thought into that part, I've started to kind of think, maybe I'm a little bit split on whether you should or shouldn't have to declare your proxies, again, inside a casual format, right? I don't know if there's a simple solution, because I think one of the things that could happen when you say, hey, my deck has proxies, is somebody at the table might say, well, I don't want to play with you, right? And of course, they have the freedom and right to do that, because that's why we do Rule 0. So maybe one solution to this is you have another deck doesn't have any proxies, and so as long as that's available, you can swap it in if the players are not okay with that, right? I think the way that I always think the rule should be is that whoever the person, right, the player that's deviating from the norm is the one that should declare. So as an example, if pretty much everybody from this, like at this cafe, at this table, whatever, we all play with proxies and it's generally accepted, and then somebody else comes in with who is very strongly against proxies, then that person should say, hey, I don't really want to play with any proxies, whatever, and kind of go from there. The other way to think about it is like if no one's playing with proxies, nobody does like Silver Border, nobody even does the Universe Beyond, right? That's pretty rare, but could happen. Then that person who is bringing those cards should declare. Again, this is where maybe the rule 0, these things will be fleshed out. I'm not really sure. It is a pretty awkward moment though, because how do you know, especially if you're just going to a random place with random players, how do you actually know what the norm is? Yeah, it's tricky. I don't want to pretend I have a good solution for this, but I think at the core is like this. Look, if you feel like you want to play a deck, please, especially for casual formats, do not let the fact that certain cards are so expensive price you out of it. If it works for you, take a basic land, write the card, or take one of these flip cards that they've been printing for all the the indicator cards, for the flip cards, for the modal dual face cards, etc., for the transform cards. Take one of those cards and just write the card that you want to play on there, right? Again, that's not another option for potentially not having to use, I don't know, a fake card that you bought from the internet. It's a real card printed by Wizard. It's just not the card. It's a way to proxy. I think, in my opinion, I just don't want any player to feel like they can't play a deck because they don't have the money to buy it, right? At the same time, I do hear a lot from players who say things like, play with the cards you have, right? You don't have to build a deck that you have cards you don't have. And I think, especially with Commander, right, the casual format, this is becoming more and more true. I mean, I think as an example, I think like the Warhammer Commander decks, like a $40, $50 Commander deck, can go toe-to-toe with almost any other Commander deck nowadays. So yeah, I don't think, and again, without any modifications, without any changes, I think the deck is strong enough to play in a casual format without any real problems. And that is something that's really great that's happening in Magic. So I don't know. I guess personally, right, if somebody sits down at my table and says, hey, I have a proxy, I'm fine with it. I think if a player sits down, don't tell me that they have a proxy, we play, and then I find out it's a proxy, even then I'm fine with it. I think the only case I would be a little bit irked is if the proxies has made the deck not fun for the group, right? A good example of this is that we sit down, we start playing, and I realize very quickly that this person has proxied a very competitive deck and everyone else is running some sort of like group hug fun decks. That's where I think I would have a problem, because it's less about proxy. It's almost like because we just didn't have a good matchup. Like, I don't want somebody to sit down and have, speed lands and everything. And because I think there's inherently the problem with fairness, right? Maybe some other people who are sitting at the table did not proxy a dual land because they don't own it and they didn't feel like it's fair to, not play with a card that they don't have. Whereas somebody may be sitting down with, a bunch of fake cards, like, imagine like majority of their deck being a proxy, and say, oh, well, because I want to play a certain format or I want to play a certain way, a certain deck, then here's all the fake cards, and I'm entitled to do that. I think that's kind of how I think about it. And here's the other thing too, like some players might not even know they have like counterfeits and fakes. Again, it's, just buying a lot of collections. I see this all the time where people think they have real cards, and then until I look at it, it's like, yeah, that's not a real card. Sorry. So that's kind of like my 2 cents on proxies. Yeah. And, one last thing. So one of my friends, Jeremiah, he is kind of like an artist, and he will kind of make art altars for people, right? But the one thing that he never does is he doesn't alter a card and make it into a proxy. He will only alter the real card. So it's kind of interesting. Like if you want him to like paint you a Black Lotus, you're gonna have to give him real Black Lotus, and he'll do what you're asking, and he'll do a great job. But he'll only use a real Black Lotus, and I find that really interesting. That there's at the core a lot of people who, I mean, at some point just really support the idea of like, hey, let's use the real cards. I think it's really valuable, and I think it's really commendable that people have this strong feeling towards the nostalgia of the game. So, look, I don't have a horse in this race. I don't really even have a strong opinion one way or another. My general opinion is, do not use counterfeits to trick people. That is the shadiest thing you could ever do, and I will hate you for life for that. If you want to play a format and you feel like you're missing cards that you just want to have because they're too expensive, good example of this, like maybe like a Guy's Cradle, maybe like Survival of the Fittest, like these kind of cards that are somewhat expensive and kind of unattainable, but also very useful, right? I think it's fine. Don't proxy Mox Diamond, Mox, Mox Jet, things like that. You don't need it. Honestly, you don't need it. It's not going to make your game that much better. It's not a card that's absolutely necessary for your deck. I guarantee it. You don't need those kind of cards. Yeah. Anyways, and lastly, just communicate. Talk to people. Let them know beforehand so no one's surprised. I think that's probably the best way we can deal with proxies. Thanks. Fun topic. See ya.